The dust-laden wind carried the scent of approaching rain as Sheriff Samuel Jameson dismounted his horse outside Roswell's general store, his boots hitting the hard-packed dirt with a weary thud. His 32 years sat heavy on his shoulders tonight, after 3 days of tracking cattle rustlers across the New Mexico territory with nothing to show but a bullet graze on his forearm and an empty canteen. "Evening, Sheriff," called Mabel Roswell from the porch. "Thought you'd be gone another day at least." Samuel touched the brim of his hat. "Those fellas know the territory better than I expected, lost their trail near the canyon. I'll head out again after the storm passes." The year was 1885, and Roswell was barely a town, just a collection of wooden buildings clinging to existence in the shadow of distant mountains. Samuel had been sheriff for 5 years now, taking the badge after the previous lawman had decided the territory was too wild for his liking. "You best get that wagon of yours home before the sky opens up," Mabel advised, glancing at the darkening clouds. "Looks like it might be a gully washer." Samuel nodded, leading his horse toward the weathered wagon he'd left parked at the edge of town. He'd need to load up the supplies he'd purchased earlier that week: flour, coffee, ammunition, and a few other necessities to restock his cabin about 2 miles outside of town. As he approached, a flash of lightning illuminated something unusual beneath his wagon. Drawing his revolver cautiously, Samuel crouched down to look. A woman lay curled on her side, using a worn carpet bag as a pillow, fast asleep despite the approaching storm. Her dress was dusty but well made, her dark hair falling across her face. Samuel holstered his gun and reached out to gently shake her shoulder. Miss, you cannot stay here." The woman startled awake, scrambling backward until her back hit the wagon wheel. Wide, frightened eyes stared at him from a face smudged with dirt but still striking in its beauty. Samuel guessed her to be in her mid-20s. "I am sorry," she said, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. "I did not mean to. I was only resting." "In this weather," Samuel extended his hand to help her up just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. "You will catch your death out here. Come on now." The woman hesitated before taking his hand. As she stood, Samuel noticed she favored her right ankle. "I am Sheriff Samuel Jameson," he introduced himself. "And you are?" "Beatrice Parker," she replied, glancing nervously around the nearly empty street. "I arrived on the afternoon stage. I was meant to meet someone, but they never came." The rain was falling steadily now. Samuel helped her collect her single bag. "You will rest in my cabin tonight," he said firmly. "It is not proper, I know, but I cannot leave you out in this storm. Tomorrow we can sort out where you are meant to be." Beatrice looked uncertain. "I do not wish to impose." "It is not an imposition," Samuel insisted, helping her onto the wagon seat. "It is my duty to look after folks in this town, and right now that means you." The sky fully opened as they made their way out of town, the rain pounding against them with surprising force. Samuel offered Beatrice his coat, which she gratefully wrapped around her shoulders. By the time they reached his cabin, they were both soaked through despite his best efforts to hurry. "It is not much," Samuel apologized as he lit a lantern inside the small but sturdy log cabin, "but it is dry and warm once I get the fire going." Beatrice stood dripping just inside the doorway, taking in the sparse but tidy interior. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a small table with 2 chairs sat near a window, and a narrow bed occupied the corner. Shelves held books, supplies, and cooking implements. A curtained-off area in the back presumably served as storage. "This is very kind of you," she said, her teeth chattering. Samuel quickly built a fire, which soon crackled to life. "There are some clothes behind that curtain. They belonged to my sister when she visited last year. They might fit you well enough to sleep in while your dress dries." While Beatrice changed behind the curtain, Samuel put coffee on to boil and sliced some bread and dried beef. When she emerged wearing a simple cotton nightdress and his sister's robe, her hair partially dried and combed, Samuel found himself momentarily speechless. Even with the evidence of exhaustion on her face, She was strikingly beautiful. "I hope this is acceptable," she said, tugging self-consciously at the robe's ties. "More than acceptable," Samuel replied, perhaps too quickly. He cleared his throat. "Please sit, eat something, then you can take the bed. I will make do by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Beatrice protested. "You can and you will," Samuel said gently. "It is no hardship. I have slept in far worse conditions." Over their simple meal, Samuel learned that Beatrice had come from Philadelphia to meet her uncle, who had written claiming to have established a successful ranch. She was to help manage his household, as he was a widower with no children. "His name is Harold Parker," she explained, warming her hands on the coffee cup. "The stage driver said he knew of him, but when we arrived, there was no one waiting. I asked at the hotel, but they wanted payment in advance, which She looked down. "My funds are limited until I meet my uncle, Parker," Samuel frowned. "I know most folks around these parts, but I cannot say I have heard that name. How long has your uncle been here?" "His letters suggested nearly 2 years," Beatrice said. "Though our correspondence has been infrequent," Samuel's frown deepened. Something did not sit right, but he decided not to trouble her further tonight. "Well, we will make inquiries tomorrow. For now, you need rest." That night, as Samuel lay on a bedroll near the fire, he listened to the rain beating against the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. From the bed came the soft, even breathing of his unexpected guest. He wondered about her story. 2 years in the territory was long enough that he should know this Harold Parker, especially a man successful enough to send for family from back east. Morning dawned clear and bright after the storm. Samuel woke to find Beatrice already up, her dress somewhat wrinkled but dry, her hair neatly arranged. She had made coffee and was attempting to prepare breakfast from his limited supplies. "You did not need to do that," Samuel said, rising quickly and running a hand through his sleep-tousled hair. "It seemed the least I could do," she replied with a small smile. "You have been very kind." After breakfast, they rode back to town. Samuel took Beatrice to the post office first, thinking her uncle might have left word there. "Parker, Parker," mumbled old Tom Willis, who had run the post office for as long as anyone could remember. "Cannot say I recall any mail for a Harold Parker." "What about land records?" Samuel asked. "If he has a ranch, there would be a deed." They tried the land office next, where Beatrice's concern visibly grew as the clerk shook his head. "No Parker listed as owning property within 50 miles of here, Sheriff." By midday, they had checked with every merchant and long-time resident. No one had heard of Harold Parker. Samuel watched Beatrice's face fall with each negative response, her composure remarkable despite the growing certainty that something was very wrong. "Perhaps," she finally said as they sat at a small table in the town's only cafe, "perhaps I misunderstood which town he was in." Samuel reached across the table to touch her hand gently. "Beatrice, I do not wish to alarm you, but is it possible your uncle's letters were not entirely truthful?" Her eyes met his, filled with a terrible realization. "You believe I have been deceived." "I think we need to consider that possibility," Samuel said carefully. "It is not uncommon for people to embellish their circumstances when writing home." Beatrice stared down at her barely touched stew. "I have very little money," she admitted. "Only enough for perhaps 2 nights at the hotel and a meal or two. I spent nearly everything on the train and stage fare." Samuel watched her straighten her shoulders, impressed by her determination not to break down in public. "Then I shall need to find employment immediately," she declared. "There are not many opportunities for a single woman in Roswell," Samuel warned. "Especially one without," he hesitated, "without connections or references," she finished for him. "I understand. Nevertheless, I must try." That afternoon, they visited every establishment that might possibly hire a woman. The hotel had no need for help. The dressmaker already had an assistant. The schoolhouse would not open until autumn, and even then, the position had been promised to the Reverend's niece. By late afternoon, Beatrice's composed facade was beginning to crack, though she valiantly tried to hide it. There is one more place, Samuel said finally, leading her toward a large building at the end of the main street. A sign proclaimed it the Silver Spur Saloon. A saloon. Beatrice stopped short. Sheriff Jameson, Not as what you are thinking, Samuel said quickly. Martha Holloway owns this place. She needs someone to help with cooking and cleaning. It is honest work, even if the location is not what you might have hoped for. Martha Holloway was a formidable woman in her 50s who had run the Silver Spur since her husband's death a decade earlier. She looked Beatrice up and down critically. "Can you cook?" she demanded. "Yes, madam," Beatrice replied. "I managed my father's household for years before his passing." "Can you handle drunken men trying to steal a kiss or worse?" Beatrice paled slightly but lifted her chin. "I can make it abundantly clear that such attentions are unwelcome." Martha's stern expression softened slightly. "You will work from dawn until after the supper rush, Sundays off. Room and board upstairs plus $2 a week. You stay out of the saloon proper after 8 in the evening unless I call for you." "That is most generous," Beatrice said, relief evident in her voice. "Do not thank me yet," Martha warned. "It is hard work and some folks will look down on you just for working here, even if you are never serving drinks or entertaining the customers." "I understand," Beatrice said firmly. "When shall I start?" "Right now," Martha said. "Samuel, help her bring her things. She can have the small room at the end of the hall upstairs." As they walked to collect Beatrice's bag from where they had left it at the sheriff's office, Samuel felt oddly disappointed. "Will you be comfortable there?" he asked. "It is a position and a roof over my head," Beatrice answered practically. "I have little choice but to be comfortable with it." She paused, turning to face him. "I cannot thank you enough for your kindness, Sheriff Jameson. Not many men would have helped a stranger as you have done." "Samuel," he corrected, "and I would like to think any decent person would have done the same." Beatrice smiled, her first genuine smile since he had found her. "Then there are fewer decent people in this world than one might hope. You are a rare man, Samuel Jameson." The weeks that followed established a new pattern. Samuel found himself taking his meals at the Silver Spur with increasing frequency, always timing his visits to coincide with Beatrice's hours in the kitchen. Her cooking quickly became legendary in Roswell, bringing in customers who previously would have eaten elsewhere. Martha, recognizing a good thing, increased Beatrice's wages after just 3 weeks. Samuel also found reasons to escort Beatrice to Sunday services, to help her carry supplies from the general store, and to check on her safety duties that no one questioned from their sheriff, but which he knew went beyond his official responsibilities. For her part, Beatrice seemed to welcome his attention. Her initial reserve gradually melted into warm smiles and gentle teasing. She asked about his work, remembered details he mentioned in passing, and sometimes had coffee waiting when she knew he'd been out on a long ride. One evening in late July, nearly 2 months after Beatrice's arrival, Samuel entered the Silver Spur to find an unfamiliar man seated at the bar, dressed in city clothes that seemed out of place in Roswell. The man was speaking to Martha, who caught Samuel's eye with a meaningful look. "Evening, Sheriff," she called with unusual formality. "This here gentleman was just asking after our Miss Parker." Samuel felt a protective instinct rise immediately. "Is that so?" he said, moving to stand beside the stranger. "And what business might you have with Miss Parker?" The man turned, revealing a pinched face with small eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. "My name is George Wilson, representing the firm of Daniels and Wilson, Philadelphia. I am seeking Miss Beatrice Parker regarding a family matter." Before Samuel could respond, Beatrice emerged from the kitchen, stopping short when she saw the visitor. "Mr. Wilson, from Father's law firm." The lawyer stood, bowing slightly. "Miss Parker, I have been tracking you across 3 territories. Your uncle has been beside himself with worry." "My uncle," Beatrice repeated, confusion evident. "You mean Uncle Harold, but he is meant to be here." Wilson looked uncomfortable. "That is what I need to discuss with you, perhaps somewhere more private." They moved to a small back room Martha used for private card games. Samuel started to excuse himself, but Beatrice caught his arm. "Please stay," she said quietly, and he nodded. Once seated, Wilson extracted papers from his case. "Miss Parker, I regret to inform you that you have been the victim of a deception. The letters you received were not from your Uncle Harold." Beatrice sat very still. "Not from Uncle Harold, but they were signed with his name in his hand." "A forgery, I am afraid," Wilson said. "Your Uncle Harold died 3 years ago in Boston." Samuel watched the color drain from Beatrice's face. But who would? Why would anyone? Wilson cleared his throat. "We believe the letters were sent by Edward Blackwell, your father's former business partner." "Mr. Blackwell," Beatrice's voice rose in disbelief. "But why would he send me across the country on a false premise? To access your inheritance," Wilson explained. "Your father's will stipulated that you would inherit everything upon reaching 25 or upon marriage. However, if you were to—" he hesitated. "Disappear before either condition was met, the estate would pass to his business partner as the executor. So he sent me away, expecting I would not survive," Beatrice said flatly. "We believe so. Your 25th birthday is in 3 weeks. Mr. Blackwell likely assumed a young woman alone in the territories would meet with unfortunate circumstances long before then." Samuel felt a surge of anger. "This Blackwell fellow sent her out here to die." "Not explicitly, of course," Wilson said uncomfortably. "But yes, that appears to be the intention. When Miss Parker's housekeeper became concerned after receiving no word for over a month, she approached our firm. We discovered the deception and have been searching for Miss Parker since." "How much?" Beatrice asked suddenly. "How much is my inheritance that Mr. Blackwell would go to such lengths?" Wilson adjusted his spectacles. "Your father's estate is valued at approximately $30,000. Samuel nearly choked. That was a fortune out here. "What happens now?" Beatrice asked, her voice steadier than Samuel would have expected given the circumstances. "You should return to Philadelphia immediately," Wilson advised. "Once you are there, we can finalize the transfer of the estate to your control and press charges against Blackwell." "I see." Beatrice folded her hands in her lap, looking down at them for a long moment before meeting Wilson's gaze again. "And if I choose not to return right away?" Wilson seemed taken aback. "But surely you wish to claim your inheritance and see justice done." "Of course," Beatrice agreed. "But you said my birthday is in 3 weeks. Might the paperwork be prepared and sent here for my signature? And could the charges against Mr. Blackwell be pursued without my immediate presence? It would be unusual, but yes, I suppose arrangements could be made." Wilson looked perplexed. "But why would you wish to remain here when you could return to civilization and your rightful place in society?" Beatrice's eyes flickered briefly to Samuel. "I have found Roswell to be quite civilized in its own way, Mr. Wilson, and I have made connections here that I am not eager to abandon." After Wilson departed with promises to make the necessary arrangements, Samuel walked Beatrice back to her room above the saloon. They paused at the foot of the stairs. $30,000, Samuel said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You will be a wealthy woman, Beatrice." "It seems so," she agreed, looking up at him with an unreadable expression. "Does that change things, Samuel?" He considered the question carefully. "It changes your circumstances, certainly. You need not work in a saloon kitchen anymore. You could build a fine house, open a business, or return east to the life you knew before." "That is not what I asked," Beatrice said softly. Samuel took a deep breath. "No, it does not change how I feel. I have grown very fond of you, Beatrice Parker, more than fond. But I would understand if your new circumstances lead you back to Philadelphia." "And if I wish to stay?" she asked, a hint of vulnerability in her voice that he had rarely seen. "Then I would be the happiest man in the New Mexico territory," Samuel said honestly. "But I would not want you to stay out of gratitude or pity for a simple sheriff who cannot offer you what you deserve." Beatrice stepped closer, laying her hand on his chest. "Samuel Jameson, when you found me sleeping under that wagon, I was at my lowest point, desperate, deceived, and alone. You offered me kindness without expectation. You helped me find my footing in this town. You saw me as a person of worth when I had nothing." "You have always had worth," Samuel said, covering her hand with his own. "And now that I have discovered I am an heiress, do you know what my first thought was?" she continued. "It was that I could finally feel worthy of you." Samuel felt his heart jump. "Beatrice." "I do not wish to return east," she said firmly. "My life is here now, my heart is here." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with emotion. "With you, if you will have it." Samuel could resist no longer. He bent and kissed her gently, then with growing intensity as she responded eagerly. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Beatrice Parker," he said. "I think I have since that first morning when you insisted on making breakfast in my cabin even after sleeping on my lumpy old bed." She laughed softly. "It was not so lumpy. And I love you too, Sheriff Jameson. More than I thought possible when I first arrived here." On Beatrice's 25th birthday, 3 weeks later, 2 significant events occurred in Roswell. First, papers arrived confirming her as the rightful heir to her father's estate, along with news that Edward Blackwell had been arrested for fraud and attempted theft. Second, she and Samuel were married in a simple ceremony in the town's small church. With her inheritance, Beatrice bought land adjoining Samuel's modest property and built a larger cabin, nothing ostentatious, but comfortable enough for a growing family. She also invested in several businesses in town, including a partnership with Martha to improve the Silver Spur and transform part of it into a proper restaurant. Samuel continued as sheriff, though he now had 2 deputies to help with the more routine matters, allowing him to spend more time with his wife. Their home became known for its hospitality, with Beatrice often feeding travelers and newcomers to town just as Samuel had once fed her. A year after their wedding, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple, Beatrice took Samuel's hand and placed it gently on her slightly rounded belly. "I believe our family will be growing by spring," she said, her eyes alight with joy. Samuel's face broke into a wide grin. He pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed with happiness. "I never imagined finding you under that wagon would lead to this," he whispered against her hair. "You are the greatest treasure I could have discovered." "And to think," Beatrice said, settling comfortably against his chest, "it all began because I had nowhere else to sleep but under a stranger's wagon." "Thank God for that wagon," Samuel said, kissing her forehead. "And for the storm that gave me an excuse to bring you home." "It was never about the storm," Beatrice said knowingly. "You would have found a reason to help me regardless." Samuel smiled, knowing she was right. "Well, then thank God for putting you in my path." As darkness settled over the land they now shared, Samuel held the woman who had come to him with nothing but a carpet bag, and had given him everything that truly mattered in return. Whatever challenges might come their way, they would face them together, their love a shelter stronger than any cabin, their bond forged in the wild heart of the West where they had both, unexpectedly, found home. On their 5th wedding anniversary, with their young son and daughter playing in the yard, Samuel presented Beatrice with a gift, a small, carved wooden wagon. "To remember where our story began," he said as she turned the delicate carving in her hands. Beatrice laughed, her eyes bright with tears of joy. "As if I could ever forget. You found me sleeping under a wagon and said I would rest in your cabin that night." She set the carving on the mantel and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Little did you know I would be resting there for a lifetime." "I would not have it any other way," Samuel said, drawing her close for a kiss as their children giggled in the background. Outside, the New Mexico sun shone down on the home and life they had built together, far richer than any inheritance could provide, a legacy of love that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a stormy frontier night.